eta Bilbauriona beizati bat kandida miaz
جسده محروق سراج عبد الله صار محمد حسوني
Agapita iturralde zuloaga eta Maria iturralde zuloaga Gernika
عبد الله رمضان أبو غزال مريم تفواسيل موسى في غزة
Daniel Ibarzabal Katjalinarien jaio
أنوار محمد علي دنيا مهدي حمد
Juana Beotegi Bilbao Jacinta Gandiaga
محمد فرج الله سليم محمد وآل خياط
Guernica
في غزة
Guernica في Gaza Guernica في Gaza Guernica في Gaza
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. صباح الخير, مساء الخير, مساء النور, assalamu alaikum. Welcome. Before I go any further, I want to make sure that I make land acknowledgement that my own university, San Francisco State, sits on the unceded, stolen indigenous land of the Ohlone and Ramaytush Nation that continues to be indigenous as we continue to reaffirm our commitment to defeating settler colonialism in the US, Palestine, and everywhere. I make this acknowledgement as an indigenous Palestinian whose land is colonized by Israeli settler colonialism, and where it is essential for anyone who comes to visit or lives on the indigenous land of Palestine to not only acknowledge whose land it is, but that no matter how long or short their stay is, and no matter how good or noble their intentions are, the fact that they continue to reside and visit and be in Palestine, their presence must be validated by indigenous Palestinian people if they do not wish to be labeled as settlers. This is something that we apply to our presence here in the US and anywhere where indigenous people are. I want to also go to honor the fallen. The Gaza toll, death toll today, as of today, it's over 37,000, 85,000 injured, and more than 10,000 or more are disappeared. And we do not know how many people or homes have been destroyed. 80,000 people have been displaced or more. These are lower estimates. 15,000 people, children have been killed. Children are on the verge of starvation and are threatened by death. You hear all the statistics. So we want to take a moment of silence to honor, acknowledge, and mourn the martyrs, the thousands who not have fallen only in Gaza. Across Palestine, we know over 400 martyrs in the West Bank alone since October 7, but also and the surrounding countries, Lebanon, everywhere else, Yemen, Syria, everywhere in Jordan, in Iraq, but also around the world. and over the centuries, as a result of white supremacy, imperialism, and Western empire. I would like you to join me in a moment of silence today as we commemorate the anniversary of Grenfell, the massacre actually, in which at least 72 martyrs have fallen, and the victims of Guernica, where you saw the video in 1937, which was bombed by Hitler in order to support Franco's fascist rule. It was in the Basque area. And in October of this year, the Guernica residents expressed their support for Palestine by the very dramatic video you've seen, and raised the flag of the Basque liberation along with Palestine. So please, let's take a moment of silence to honor everybody. I want to begin with thanking our esteemed panelists who have joined us and took time out of their very busy schedules. I want to thank our tireless team, and starting with Laith Ghulum, who's behind the scene. If you could just show your face, Laith, and who is supposed to be disabilities assistant, but also works on every single aspect, because we do not get support from San Francisco State University. I also want to thank Anais, who is a research assistant, who is not here today with us. I want to thank Dr. Salim Shahade, who is also disabilities assistant with the San Francisco State. I would like to thank Muhammad Abu Nasser, who is from Gaza, who is working on social media. And last but not least, from our team, I would like to thank Lean Asiri, who is now going to join us and share who are the people who are co-sponsors. So please, Lean, introduce yourself and come on the screen and mention who are co-sponsoring this open classroom with us.
Thank you, Dr. Abdelhadi. I'm so honored, first of all, to be with everybody here. It's always really lovely to learn every day from all of you. So to begin with, I graduated from the American University of Beirut with media and communications last year, and now I'm interning with Dr. Rabab Abdelhadi, doing Ahmed and teaching Palestine media work as well as research assistants. And I'm from the south of Lebanon. So before we proceed with today's session, we just wanted to take a moment to thank all of the co-sponsors that have been very supportive of our open classrooms and Dr. Abdelhadi's efforts, despite all the repression that we've been facing. So thank you to Westchester for Palestine, Al-Auda, Palestinian Right to Return Coalition, Columbia University Apartheid Divest or Quad, Black Alliance for Peace in New York City and New Jersey, Center for Place, Culture and Politics in CUNY, and then CUNY for Palestine, Samidoun, Palestinian Prisoners Solidarity Network, Masar al-Badil, Palestinian Alternative Revolutionary Path Movement, Feminists for Justice in and for Palestine, Ilom Bey Brath Foundation, Institute of the Critical Studies for Zionism, Frente Independentista Borroquia, hoping I pronounced this correctly, from Puerto Rico, International Commission to Support Palestinian Rights, Right to Education, Birzeit University, and finally, Art Forces. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you all. And we should say that Frente Independentista Boricua is one of the main leading organizations for Puerto Rican independence, and the International Commission for to support Palestinian rights is from Gaza, joining us from Gaza. And as you know, the Right to Education from Birzeit University is joining us from Palestine. So we are very honored to have such an amazing group of organizations that are supporting us from around the world. And also, we haven't been able to reach out to everybody because of the shortness that we have been able to do this. And I wanted to mention a little bit about the background of this open classroom. As you know, we have been doing open classrooms for a very, very long time. We used to do them in person when we have classes in person, and then when COVID, the pandemic hit, we started doing them online, and we continued doing them afterwards because we have been able to reach many of our members of our communities without actually having to deal with the problems of reserving space at the university and having problems with the university telling us that there is no space and issues of this sort, or all of a sudden space not being available and the cost that's involved with even trying to get parking spaces. So the internet has been quite much more possible for us to do that. We hit some snags. One of the first big, huge open classrooms we did was after the Black Intifada and the murder of George Floyd. And Dr. Robin Kelly was part of that when we did Black Lives, Black Liberation, and the Indivisibility of Justice in July 2020. And we ended up having 15,000 people, organic views. And we kept rising, and we believe that the Zionists have had it with us by the time we wanted to host a class with many luminaries, including Layla Khaled, and they made a very big campaign to shut it down. They've just said we're not going to allow them to have it anymore. We continued with our open classrooms. We grieved against the university. We won our grievances. We are now in the process of arbitration against the university for shutting down our academic freedom and actually enabling a big tech corporation, Zoom, facilitating and justifying that it is their right to do so, even though they have a major corporation with contract with the university servicing over 400,000 people. So they're not providing service to the university. The university is not supposed to continue with the contract, or at least renegotiate it to ensure our academic freedom. In any case, we continue doing these open classrooms. And at this time around, this is because I've put in for a Palestine course that I've been teaching since 2009 at San Francisco State University. That is a very popular class that fulfills multiple general education graduation requirements from 2009, since 2009, and it's been very, fills out every semester, every year. We offer it every year. And the fall of this year in 2023, it was canceled. The university would not let us know why. I pressured, other people pressured, students pressured. We were able to have it in this spring, and it was full. There wasn't a seat in the class. I asked to teach it in the summer. The university, in writing, offered to teach it. Said they wrote me in writing, and in the arbitration, the university lawyers actually presented the document saying that this courses are these your courses? And I said yes. But then the university backtracked and canceled this course in the midst of the genocide in Gaza. The students waged a campaign saying we would like to take the course. Scholars, academics, community members, the university refused. We waited until the last minute for the university to reverse its wrong decision, and that serves the pro-Israeli agenda of silencing Palestine and criminalizing Palestine in the curriculum. The university refused to reverse its decision, so we decided to do this class as part of the popular University for Gaza, Palestine. And we set up the class with 5 open classrooms to coincide with the 5 weeks of the summer school. Actually, we're going to do 6 classrooms. So we have 5, and this is the second one. We are thrilled that the first classroom we had on June 6th had 44,000 viewers. And now we have in the classroom 402 students registered, students of Palestine have formally registered for the class. So we have this open classroom, and then every week I meet with the students in the class internally to discuss the material. We share the material readings, for example, from all of you who are participating with us today. So actually my colleagues are telling me that we have 410, because every day we check that we have more and more people signing up for the class. And we make assignment, we discuss, and we are actually we put it on the syllabus for the fall. For some reason, it's been changed for the fall. So now we have another battle. We hope that you all will support us. And why we do this is because we believe that it's really important to share our knowledge with all our communities. Knowledge should not be produced only in the classroom. It is in the classroom and outside of the classroom. Knowledge should not be only for scholarship and should not be only for students who pay tuition. Knowledge does not only emerge from academia, it emerges also from our communities. And this is how we all come together in order for us to do that. We also emphasize and stress in teaching Palestine on the importance of commemoration of anniversaries that affect all our communities, and through which we can actually remember and understand, learn about the past, think about how it affects the present, and how does it direct the future. So in that sense, today is the anniversary of Grenfell massacre, and we were honored to receive this morning a message from ISIS, a leader, an elder from London, which we will be playing in a minute. Late, if you don't mind, please go ahead and play the message from ISIS.
Greetings, Salam Alaikum. My name is Isis Amlak. I am a resident of North Kensington. I live a few minutes walk from the Grenfell Tower. Today marks 7 years since at least 72 members of my local community, neighbours, were massacred, became martyrs in the Grenfell Tower atrocity. 18 of those were children. So I'm going to do a quick presentation within 5 minutes about the connection between the murders in the Grenfell Tower fire 7 years ago and the ongoing genocide that has claimed over 40,000 lives, over 40,000 martyrs in Gaza. I want to begin by thanking Rabab Abdul Hadi and the Popular University for Gaza for giving me this opportunity to send this message of solidarity. I just want to say that in both of these situations, there is a common enemy. And the common enemy is capitalism. It is settler colonialism, the continuation of colonialism, a system which dehumanizes some for profit and for the advantage of others. What happened in Grenfell Tower was wholly preventable. Residents predicted it. They knew that the profiteering that RBKC, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and the TMO, the Tenants Management Organisation, were pursuing was dangerous. The cladding that they used to gentrify the building, to make it look more acceptable for people that they were trying to sell properties to make profits, that cladding was found to be substandard and faulty. It was described as having been like pouring petrol on the building and led to the fire consuming it in a matter of minutes. The inquiry found systemic failings, all based on neglect and trying to find cheap ways to make a profit. What we saw was dehumanization, the same form of dehumanization that we see going on in Gaza and more widely in occupied Palestine, where some people's lives are not valued and other people's lives are, where the language of dehumanization is used. And we see the same thing with racialized, minoritized, working class communities here in the UK. The sorts of people that lived in Grenfell Tower, who are not deemed important enough to take into consideration. Instead, those who sought to gain profit looked at their bank accounts. So I would love to have the opportunity to talk more about this and to continue to make and explain and extrapolate those connections between how settler colonialism, a system that was implemented and continues to this day in occupied Palestine by the British, by the English, starting way before the 7th of October with the Balfour Declaration and the creation of the Zionist, fascist, ideological system, how it connects to this area where I live, run by a conservative local authority, which also adheres to the same system, colonialist attitude that saw this atrocity take place. As I say, I've only got a few minutes, so I would love to spend more time to talk about this, and I hope I will have the opportunity. But the main purpose of this was just to highlight that the systems that oppress our people in Gaza are the same as systems that oppress us over here. And the systems that cause the murder and dehumanization of our people in Gaza are the same systems that dehumanized and caused the murder of the 72 in Grenfell Tower. So I send you solidarity, I send you positivity, I send love and prayers for the people of Gaza and for all the oppressed people worldwide. An injury to one is an injury to all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Isis. It's such an honor and a pleasure because they've started a silence march at 6 today to commemorate Grenfell, and the fact that Sister Isis, and she has a radio show too, took the time to send us this message. It's really a huge dedication to be able to do that. And we also exchange communication. We're going to be having her again on our open classroom to discuss more, to engage more in the whole question of the transatlantic collaboration, transatlantic colonialism, settler colonialism, engagement of and all of these projects, repressive projects, and solidarities. Today's title of the class is Against Erasure and Greed, Jerusalem to Tulsa and Trail of Tears to Grenfell. And many people always say, why do we include so many topics? And part of the reason is because this is a Palestine course. And in the Palestine course, it's really important to make sure that we are situating Palestine in the world. Palestine is not exceptional. Palestine is not isolated. Palestine doesn't live in a vacuum. So it's really important to think about how we think about all of these issues. So we're going to have 3 rounds. We are going to have a very esteemed panel of scholars, activists, organizers. When they start speaking, their bios are going to be put online so you can read them, because we don't really have time to read all their accomplishments. Even if they're short, we don't have enough time to read them all. They're actually quite much more accomplished. And so we want to discuss, in the rounds, we want to discuss the whole question of, quote unquote, the term gentrification. Everybody talks about gentrification of Harlem, gentrification of Jerusalem, gentrification of London, gentrification of the Bay Area, and so on. It's always used in that, and the term is actually very jarring, because it's a sanitizing, a very, very violent and brutal process. So we would like to talk about that. We want to talk about the particular process that this is happening in Silwan. What's going on in Silwan? What's happening there? What happened a few days ago with the Israeli Supreme Court? What is the project? What is the intention of that? We want to talk about Tulsa and how that has been connected. Tulsa was labeled the Black Wall Street, and what has happened? People forget about that. How is that connected with it? And we want to talk about how does this also connect with the whole question of the displacement, because what gentrification also leads to displacement and to erasure. How does this connect with the Trail of Tears and other projects of settler colonialism of displacing indigenous peoples from their lands? Then we were going to go into what does erasure really entails? What does it mean in theory, in practice, in colonialist, capitalist violence? How are they connected with each other? What do they do? what are expressions of culture of resistance, resistance art, resistance in general? How do we challenge business as usual, historically and contemporarily? Then we will have the third round of conversation among each other. So we will start the first round with Professor Kelly, with Sister Manar, and with Professor Abdo. So would you, as Manar, can you start us off with maybe talking about Silwan, 5 minutes each? Or
Yeah, sure.
yeah, go ahead.
Hello, hi.
Your camera is not showing, Manar.
Oh yeah, just 1 second. Okay, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Hello, greetings to everyone on the panel. I am so thankful to have the privilege to discuss a topic that is really personal to me and resonates with the struggles in Silwan and worldwide. My name is Manar. I'm from occupied Palestine, Jerusalem, and I'm honored to be here to speak on behalf of the Eyewitness Silwan project in occupied Jerusalem. So I'll start with a brief introduction about the project Eyewitness Silwan. This project is based in Silwan town in occupied Jerusalem. Silwan town is the southern flank of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. And Eyewitness Silwan is an initiative that started in 2015 between Mada Creative Center in Silwan and US-based art organization Art Forces. Our project brings together diverse members, including Palestinians, Palestinian Americans, Jewish and Latin Americans, along with many other international artists and activists. And we aim through our project to counteract the unjust and inhumane displacement and dispossession of Palestinians from their homes. And for this purpose, we create large-scale eyes, murals that speak truth to power. So these murals are visible across the valley from the edge of the old city near the Western Wall and the Masjid Al-Aqsa Mosque, and serve as a powerful witness to the struggles of the Palestinian people in Palestine and in specific in Silwan. So we paint eyes of local and international artists, activists, martyrs, freedom fighters. So we have eyes of Malcolm X, George Floyd, Iyad al-Hallaq, and many other people. And we aim to connect the struggle in Silwan to global movements for liberation and inspire international attention and action, and raise awareness about what's happening in Silwan and shed a light on what's happening there. Because the situation in Silwan is a clear example of ethnic cleansing under the guise and mask of heritage tourism. To explain more, there are several international Israeli organizations that work along with the Israeli Nature and Parks Authority and right-wing Zionist settler organizations like Ateret Kahanim and Elad. And these organizations are registered as non-profit ones. But in reality, they receive significant fundings from supporters in the US, and with the backing of the state, Jerusalem municipality and these institutions have constructed major tourist centers like Air David, for example, and Palestinian land in Wadi Hilwe. So rebranding and renaming Silwan as the city of David. And if we go back in history, like since the 1980s, Israel has been moving its citizens into Silwan, resulting in numerous human rights violations, including the forced eviction and displacement of many Palestinian residents. And we have a number of 7,800 demolition orders issued against homes and structures in Silwan since the occupation of Jerusalem in 1967. So there is a neighborhood in Silwan called Al-Bustan neighborhood. In that neighborhood, there are 128 houses with demolition orders, as Israel plans to replace these homes with a new Bible-themed tourist site. Another neighborhood called Batn al-Hawa neighborhood. In this neighborhood, there is over 87 houses with eviction notices. Among these houses is a house for Abu Nab family, and this house has been converted into a synagogue. with plans to turn it later into a cultural center. If we go back more in history, we've always heard about how the Yemenite Jews and Palestinians had really good and peaceful relations. They were living together in peace. And the history of the Yemenite Jewish community in Silwan is being manipulated to justify these actions. While Palestinians themselves, we do acknowledge that a Yemenite Jewish community once lived in the area, in Silwan, and coexisted with us peacefully. But the current expansion of Jewish settlements has no connection to this history. So there is a land in Silwan called the Red Land. In December 2022, this land was seized. And of course, it was seized in collaboration with far-right settler organizations and the Israeli Nature and Parks Authority. And for this land, actually, it was owned by the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate and leased to the Cimmerian family for over a century in Silwan. So such actions, though framed as protecting archaeological and heritage interests, are only attempts to further ethnically cleanse Palestinians from Jerusalem. So drawing parallels with other historical and contemporary struggles against erasure and greed, we see similar patterns of displacement and dispossession. So the history of Tulsa, as Dr. Rabab mentioned before, where the thriving Black Wall Street was destroyed in 1921, reveals a narrative of systematic racism, which at the same time mirrors the experiences of Palestinians in Silwan. Both communities have faced targeted violence and policies aimed to erase their presence and heritage. Furthermore, the Trail of Tears, a forced relocation of Native American tribes, this also resonates with the Palestinian experience because both them and Palestinians involve long histories of colonial violence, displacement, and attempts to erase indigenous cultures. The comparison underscores the global nature of these struggles and the connections of oppressed communities. Last but not the least, the Grenfell exposed also issues of social inequality, and this was towards, of course, marginalized communities like Silwan. Grenfell illustrates how systematic inequalities and disregard for certain populations lead to devastating consequences. So I witnessed Silwan by the murals we paint. We don't only like purify the neighborhood and show solidarity with people living there, but also by connecting these struggles with other struggles in the whole world, we aim to foster a deeper understanding of the nature of gentrification, colonial violence, and land theft. And we hope to amplify the voices of these fighting against these injustices and to encourage the global solidarity and action with what's happening, of course, in Silwan and Palestine, occupied Palestine in general. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manar. I can't believe in such a short time how much you encapsulated. This is really amazing. We go next to Professor Robin Kelly and historical analysis as a historian of African American history, of American history, of also Palestinian and African American history. Please tell us about Tulsa deeper. Yes. And any connections that you'd like to make, of course, in 5 minutes.
Right, in 5 minutes. Great. Well, first of all, it's always great to be with you, Rabab. I'm always, try to say yes to everything. And also all the panelists, especially my brother, Mohammed Abdul. It's just great to be with you. And just last night, we had our commencement for the People's University for Liberated Palestine. So we're kind of lifted from that. Just 2 days ago, as you probably know, the Oklahoma Supreme Court refused to hear a case calling for reparations for the Tulsa Massacre of 1921, which was a kind of huge blow. There's 2 final survivors who are over 100 years old now, and that case was basically dismissed. I want to begin there because this has been a long, long struggle to get reparations for the violence of the Tulsa Race Massacre. If you can show that slide, there's a slide I want to bring to you. And if you see this, on the upper left side, that is Tulsa in 1921 and in the aftermath of the massacre. Whoops. Okay, you could see it. Okay. On the right, of course, is the Nakba, it's Palestine, 1948. The bottom left is Philadelphia after the MOVE bombing. And the right is Gaza in 2023. And I don't need to tell you the similarities. The picture tells it, and just reflect on that. So before we talk about Tulsa, the context is very, very important. I feel like I don't have to say much about Palestine because Manar said made beautiful connections. But we have to understand the context. The context is Tulsa was one of a series of massacres, of pogroms, during World War I and after, and it's an extension of the war on colonies. It's not an accident that the U.S. invasion of Haiti and the Dominican Republic was 1915, 1916, respectively. You had the pogrom in East St. Louis in 1917, with, again, murders of Black people by white mobs supported by the police, an increase in lynchings, the Red Summer of 1919, Chicago in 1919, Cleveland, Omaha, Knoxville, Charleston, South Carolina, Elaine, Arkansas. These were violent times. Many of them were around dispossession of land, but a lot of these were around labor. General strikes being waged. It was a kind of combination of race massacres, and pogroms and class rebellion at the same time. When we talk about Tulsa, of course, is on stolen land. And of course, Tulsa, Oklahoma itself, specifically, becomes the landing place for what was mentioned being the Trail of Tears, the forced population removal and settlement in places like in Oklahoma from the southeastern territories of Georgia, Florida, Alabama. And so when we ask the question about the forced march, about the Trail of Tears, we're talking about the Creek, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, the Seminole, and many of them, not many, a handful, were actually slave owners. So when we ask the question of how did Black people get to Oklahoma, some of them came because they were owned by wealthy tribal members, and they made that march of the Trail of Tears. In other words, there were Black people in the March of the Trail of Tears. On the other hand, some of them were not enslaved. They were relatives, they were spouses, they were children of Seminole in particular, in the Choctaw. And many of them died along the way. The other thing about Oklahoma is during Civil War and after Civil War, Oklahoma became open land where they used indigenous land and gave it away through the Homestead Act. So another act of dispossession. Formerly enslaved Black people took advantage of the Homestead Act when they could and moved to Oklahoma and in fact established all Black towns to protect themselves. So again, think about the irony of all these things, of the various forms of dispossession, enslavement, emancipation, the resettlement of Black people on indigenous land. And in some cases, these are Black indigenous people on land that they had been displaced to. Finally, Tulsa was an oil town. I'm gonna say a few things about that at the very end. But because of the oil town, it flourished very quickly because of oil. And that's partly why you have this attraction on the part of white people throughout the South, and especially Black people moving in there to take advantage of the wealth. Now, let me just say something about Black Wall Street. I tend to play down the Wall Street aspect of it because the area of what's called Greenwood, the Black community in Tulsa, only about 6 blocks were considered like the wealthy business area. But we're talking about 35 square blocks that were destroyed. The vast majority of people, Black people living in Tulsa, were not on Black Wall Street. They were not wealthy. When we look at the sort of death toll, we're talking about 300 people killed at least, hundreds more injured, 1,200 Black-owned dwellings destroyed, along with businesses, schools, a hospital, public library, dozens of Black churches. These buildings some of them were torched, or planes were used to drop turpentine bombs on them. And white people went into Black homes, the Black wealthy homes, and took money, pianos, Victrolas, jewelry, clothing, lamps. But that is the dramatic story. That's the story you see on Watchmen. That's the story that we know about. The story we don't know about, the vast majority who were rendered homeless were working class people. They were renters. They were boarders. They were living in ramshackle houses. Some of them actually owned by Black real estate or Black property owners. They were built out of leftover wood from old barns and packing crates. That is the massacre in Tulsa, the Black working class, that got the brunt of it. When we talk about reparations, it's always about how do we get money to those businesses and wealthy people, but no discussion of the mass of people whose lives are destroyed, who end up being forced out of Tulsa. And in fact, ended up in that picture, when they're marching toward a baseball field, toward a public park, where they were held basically as prisoners for a while in this process of displacement. Two other things I want to say before the final statement, and that is the spark for the mob was not real estate, although it was a land grab, but it was another form of property rooted in patriarchy, and that is the property in women. And this is one of the things that makes the pogroms of this period slightly different from Palestine. If a Black man accused of assaulting a white woman, that was the effective dog whistle, right? More important than Negroes with grand pianos or bank accounts. That wasn't the thing. It was this idea. And those people who had interest in coveting the property could certainly mobilize white working people, the white poor, to say, look, a Black man, assaulted a white woman. It was, of course, exaggeration. And they went in there with guns and began trying to shoot up a Black community where Black people were organized. They showed solidarity and fearlessness. There were Black World War I veterans who represented all classes in Greenwood and came and defended their own property. And that's the story we also don't hear. That is armed self-defense, and the fact that they were able to hold on to Greenwood despite the violence and the leveling of that community, because they were armed and they defended themselves. And I think that's an important thing to think about in relationship to Palestine. Finally, two things. When we think about the question of so-called gentrification, which of course is a violent process, which belies its word, the disinvestment in Greenwood over the years, the construction of the Interstate 244 highway, so-called urban renewal policies, actually ended up forcing people out, Black people out of Greenwood more than anything else. They didn't need bombs. What they needed was state policy and a policy of disinvestment, which then opened up the space for gentrification, so-called moving white people in. And what did they do with money? They invested in a museum commemorating Black Wall Street, which is really a Trojan horse to advance the ongoing movement to move white people and dispossess Black folks from Greenwood. And one last statement, as we keep speaking about the Tulsa Massacre in terms of property rights, property destroyed. We also think of the Nakba in terms of property rights, property destroyed. But we all know there's much more. When we think about the need to talk about decolonization in order to advance beyond land as property toward a vision of freedom, not based on ownership or possession or anthropocentrism, the land has been kind of enslaved and needs liberation so the earth could flourish, so people could flourish, so the historical and contemporary structures of violence might end, in opening up a radically different future. We can only see this when we think of not the 1921 violence and dispossession, but when we think of the dispossession that created Oklahoma in the first place. So it's worth remembering that Tulsa, as an oil boom town, and that is evidence of success, is part of the problem. You know, when we talk about like what it means to transform the land, and think about the solidarity with indigenous movements at the forefront of these struggles, we've got to think about fracking, pipelines, fossil fuel extraction, environmental racism, pushing back the climate catastrophe. So Tulsa becomes not just the loss of Black wealth, but really a place of catastrophe, which is at the center of much of our global catastrophe. And so there's much more I could say about that. I know we're going to have other rounds, but these are just my initial thoughts.
Thank you so much, Robin. And before I turn it over to Dr. Abdo, I was just thinking about some of the things that are kind of like thinking about connecting also with Grenfell, because the whole question of this whole quote unquote gentrification, urban renewal, building things supposedly to improve the lives of people and so on. Also, the other thing I was thinking about, this whole thing about accusing Black men or men of color of ogling the white women and so on, and this whole tale that the Israeli propaganda machine have created about Palestinian men, and every single day we're getting more and more evidence that is actually not true, but it's sticking to us because it is supposedly in the DNA of Arab, Muslim, and Palestinian men and men of color. The whole question and why they deserve to be lynched. So it's I really appreciate all of the and the connecting it, the ways connecting it with Manar's discussion around that. Also, I really appreciate the what you talked about, the irony and the complications around the question of the relationship between indigenous people and enslaved Black people, because also the history of it. Manar talked about Palestinian and Yemeni, because also a lot of people can conflate things and say this is the way race works in both places, and we know it's much more complicated. We need to discuss this. So I think it's really, and the whole thing about is it all rich people? Is it all wealthy people? What's going on? And the whole question of kind of like memorializing things, making artifacts and so on, and then everybody can go look at it and then basically forget it. And I think this is now takes us to the discussion of Dr. Abdo around the whole question of the indigenous and the Palestinian discussion. But before I do, I just want to say that Dr. Abdo has been hugely and violently victimized by Columbia University. The president of Columbia University actually mentioned Dr. Abdo in the hearings in the Congress, that she promised that Dr. Abdo will be fired, and basically vindictively Dr. Abdo lost his job specifically for speaking his mind and actually doing his job as explaining his own intellectual ideas to students and teaching the students, doing what he is doing. That's huge. That is not something that we should let them get away with it. They should be held accountable. They should not be getting scot-free, whether it is Minouche Shafiq or anybody else in any of these administrations that are collaborating with the state in repressing and basically producing an environment of fascism. So people should be kind of like doing all the organizing and all. But I also wanted to say is that Dr. Abdo is not acting as a victim, even though he has been victimized. He continues producing, he's continuing to be acting, he's continuing to be doing what he needs to be doing. And so we need to be all there in order to support Dr. Abdo, stop this injustice, and make sure that it doesn't happen again to him or to anybody else, and see whatever we can. And with that, we're very honored to have you, Dr. Abdo. The floor is yours. Also 5 minutes, sorry.
Shalom Aleichem to our siblings who might be listening. Peace be upon you all. Laith, Muhammad, Lean, thank you so much for all the tech and all your support in getting us rounded together. Rabab, I'm really grateful for your invitation. Manar, Robin, my dearest elder Robin, and Susan, it really is a genuine honor being with you all today. There's much that could be said. There's much that should be said. I will try and constrain, obviously, to 5 limits, given the limitations and, inshallah, the ongoing rounds. And thank you, Rabab, so much for your kind words at the beginning. I just wanted to also correct that, alhamdulillah, I wasn't fired. I completed my contract. They just torpedoed any opportunity for me to remain at Columbia. But that's another discussion. I'm here really to try and share with you all and with our fellow listeners and viewers a little bit of a story of 1492 that I write on before I hopefully have enough time to delve a little bit into the Trail of Tears. There's much complexity and nuance that needs to be added. 1492 is a very important year, even prior to, if you will, the Trail of Tears, and we're talking here the 1830s. And that becomes very crucial to sit down and talk about because 2 things happened in 1492. And I usually say that this is a religious racial war. And again, I don't shy away from the fact that it is a religious war. Why? In 1492, Ferdinand and Isabel persecuted, murdered, forcibly converted Muslims and Jews. Muslims and Jews, this is in Andalusia in modern-day Spain. Muslims and Jews were referred to as savages and heathen, savage being the racial descriptor, heathen being the religious. And that was projected, of course, during the Colombian conquistador invasion of the Americas onto indigenous people. We have to understand that settler colonialism is a structure, and this is what 1492 established, right? And what it means when we use terms as Native Americans, Asian Americans, Indian Americans, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, Palestinian Americans, et cetera, in terms of legitimizing that settler colonial order, when America, again, is not so much as a dream, as much as it is a nightmare, as Malcolm had stated, and rightfully so, right? So it seems that the only person that doesn't get to identify as a hyphenated American is the white American because they're assumed to be the native of the land. But in Columbus's conquistador invasion of the Americas, he had referred to the Taino people or the weapons that they had used as alfanges, which is the Spanish term to describe scimitars, or that is synonymous with scimitars, which is the weapon that Muslims were using against the Crusaders. Hernan Cortez, the 16th century Spanish conquistador, had referred to Aztec temples as Moorish mosques, Aztec women as Moorish women. He had referred to Montezuma, the Aztec leader, as a sultan. Even the term Berdach that was used to describe two-spirit people was actually projected first on Muslims, gender non-conforming Muslims, queer Muslims, if you will, for lack of a better term that existed then. Right. So the new world is built very much in the image of the old. This is a continuing, crusading, ongoing project. America is leading this war. Israel is but an extension of this settler colony that it models itself upon here. And I'm talking here, and insofar as well, I'm currently standing in Canada, particularly and specifically on Anishinaabe, Algonquin sort of territory. So this becomes very crucial because land acknowledgements are not simply land acknowledgements. They're about intent, purpose, and action. I'm going to say that again, intent, purpose, and action. I am a settler of color on stolen land. When we're talking about land back Palestine, well, that is impossible without contending with land back here. And that means asserting indigenous sovereignty. That means black self-determination here, not elsewhere. And specifically now, the genocide is very much ongoing here. So Palestine is not an exception that way. And it cannot be exceptionalized that way. Palestine speaks to us in whatever framing that we choose to hear or actually to listen to Palestine speak to us through. We can operate vis-a-vis a 1917 narrative, a 1948 narrative, or we can go back to 1492, given, again, the historical, material, spiritual significance of that here that way. And yes, we're speaking about Afro-Indigenous futurities because, again, when we're talking about America, Canada, but specifically America in this context, right? White settler colonialism and the structure of settler colonialism had pitted Indigenous against Indigenous, Black against Black, Indigenous against Black. Our relationships are creased by white settler colonialism that way. And there are many things that we could sit down and unravel from that insofar as, again, anti-Blackness within Arab and Muslim communities, queerphobia within Arab and Muslim communities, and so on, dimensions that need to be contended with, alternative modes of governance, how blood quantum function differently in relationship to indigenous people and Black people insofar as to dispossess the native of the land, as well as to keep the so-called the slave a slave. A fifth of the transatlantic slaves were Muslims from the Iberian Peninsula and the west coast of Africa. How can we then not talk of spirituality and religion, given what Robin had also noted, insofar as land being a spiritual subject, not an object? Right? So spirituality has a role. Land produces the very air that we breathe, the very food, thamarat, that we eat, to be fruits or vegetables that we rely on, not only in terms of our survival, but our thriving and our nourishment. So from 100 million strong, indigenous people are now fewer than 2% of the so-called US population. And that took vicious detailed planning, legislation, forced relocation, residential school starvation, contaminated smallpox blankets, bounties on their scalps in a society in which cavalry troops have been replaced by police shootings. It's not like we don't have Trayvon Martin's, Michael Brown's, George Floyd's, Breonna Taylor's that are ongoing right here, right now. So hence, in the context of the Black Spring, Blackness and Black self-determination needs to also be centered as a pathway towards the liberation of Palestine, and not to the exclusion of it. And we're talking then about incarceration, desecration of reserved lands, foster care, the lack of infrastructure and services, poverty as a tool of ethnic cleansing that is ongoing. So the genocide continues. Up until this day, the US Constitution and Declaration of Independence unapologetically deems indigenous people as merciless Indian savages. And this is ingrained within settler psyches, including, again, immigrant and diasporic settler psyches, diasporas as myself. So this is to say nothing with regard to indigenous boarding school systems, the lived impacts to this day, 150-year program of separating indigenous children from their family. That was part of federal policy to eradicate completely indigenous communities, their identities, and to forcibly relocate to them. The Trail of Tears is just one incident. The US operated and supported more than 408 boarding school institutions in 37 states just between 1819 and 1969, many of which were run by churches, by religious organizations. 431 schools identified in total. When counting schools with multiple sites, about 20 of the schools have accounted for over 500 children deaths. We're talking about over 15 mass burial sites, both marked and unmarked, that are still being unearthed. We're talking about the emotional, physical, sexual abuse that remains rampant, in addition to malnutrition, overcrowding, the lack of healthcare. And indigenous children were given English names. They had their hair cut. They were forbidden from speaking their own languages, from engaging in their own cultural practices. Kids were died because of abusive experiences, were often buried in these unmarked graves on school grounds. And a large proportion of the system of forced assimilation with money that is superficially owed to indigenous tribes and indigenous nations, or under treaties that were also meant for them to be forcibly ceding their land that was never really ceded. So these arrangements were often coerced. Indigenous people are only commemorated nowadays when their names are on football teams, such as the Washington Redskins, or their names are on Tomahawk weapons and Apache helicopters, weapons of war. We're talking about a situation of course, 69 cop cities that are being built now. This is the consequence of settler colonialism. We're talking about over 5,203 missing indigenous girls and women since 2021. Indigenous people are disappearing at a rate equal to 2.5 more times their estimated share of the US population. Their indigenous women are likely twice to be raped in comparison to white women. Murder is the third leading cause of death for indigenous women, often perpetuated by non-indigenous people. More than half of indigenous women have experienced sexual violence. Indigenous people in the US, whose very land we stand on, whose sovereignty continues to be disregarded every day, represent the smallest racial group, 8% of the population, yet 2% of police killings. They're incarcerated at a rate of 38% higher than the national average. But this is one anchor to settler colonialism. Of course, we have what Saadia Hartman has referred to as afterlife to slavery projects. Slavery is constantly being rebirthed here in terms of stand your ground laws, police brutality, premeditated extrajudicial killings, routine stop and frisk programs, policies of broken windows, voter disenfranchisement, school to prison nexus and pipelines, impoverishment, premature deaths, 1994 crime bills, which Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders voted for, that superficially target and incarcerate the Black youth, referred to as super predators and thugs. This is what we need to contend with and need to keep centered. We must acknowledge that representative democracy is not much of a democracy at all. When we're talking about racialized district mapping, voter disenfranchisement and suppression, partisan gerrymandering, dark money ads, electoral college systems that are often pegged against the popular vote, 2010 Citizen United verdicts that give special interest groups unlimited spending, as well as bills as 5014C, that permit designated social welfare organizations to engage in electoral politics in unregulated ways. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Beyond the realm of mobilization to organizing, what are we going to do about it insofar as in setting alternatives to this order? Because the nation state is not this abstract entity that exists over and above us. Rather, we already govern each other vis-a-vis the set of capillary relation that we embody every day in our relationships with one another. This becomes the question. When we turn to, again, the forced relocation of the trailatiers, of the 5 civilized tribes, of over 100,000 people that were forcibly relocated, the violent seizure of their livestock, their looting, the burning of their houses, squatting on land that did not belong to them. Andrew Jackson's policy of the Indian Removal Act that gave the federal government the power to exchange native-held land in the Cotton Kingdom east of the Mississippi. This law required the government to negotiate the removal treaties fairly, voluntarily, peacefully. But of course, President Jackson and his government frequently ignored the letter of the law and forced indigenous people to vacate these lands that they have lived on for generations. This is what we're speaking about. We're talking about the line of white settlement that pushed westward, Indian country being shrunk progressively, gradually. In 1907, Oklahoma became a state, and Indian territory was then considered lost. This is the US self-serving concept of manifest destiny, and it's applied in Palestine, the very myth of Zionist settlers making the desert bloom. But this is the model precisely that the Zionist myth functions upon, the eradication of the native of the land, not only the removal, but their complete eradication, their complete genocide, that they are relegated to a bygone to history, ghosts and signposts of history. So it's not only that white settlers, be it Zionists or over there, have cheated indigenous people, be it Palestinians or indigenous people with false promises, but they also seized the land, the best of the land, for themselves. When we're talking about indigenous people, the slaughtering of the buffalo, that was central to indigenous people's way of life, that really had turned to and became on the verge of extermination. This wasn't, and of course, this was deployed by white settlers for fun, but it also was a way to starve indigenous people and tribes and nations entirely. And this was the logic. Kill the buffalo everywhere you can, because every buffalo dead is an Indian gone. And we can apply the same analogy in the context of more than 800,000 Palestinian olive trees that have been uprooted by Israeli authorities and settlers since 1967. And the gross agricultural income that Palestinians are deprived to, and that often, or that should at least support 100,000 Palestinian families. So I'll stop there. There's much to say insofar as the logics of extermination that are very much ongoing between here and Palestine. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdo. Yeah, of course, there is a lot definitely to say. Maybe in the third round we can talk about that. So next we would like to have to ask Dr. Susan Green and Lexa from Palestine Action to address the whole question of, which has been addressed a little bit, what does erasure entail in theory, practice, and colonial and capitalist violence? How are they connected? What do we do about them? What are expressions of culture of resistance, resistance art? Why can't we act as if business as usual? How has this been manifested historically and contemporarily? And before we go, I have a surprise for Dr. Green.
Yes.
You know what these are.
Yes.
You know what they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can talk about them. Okay. So please, yes, go ahead. 5 minutes each. Yeah.
Who do you want to go first?
Go ahead, Dr. Green.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Well, since Rabab did that, I'm going to go back in my presentation just a little bit. Let's see. Share screen. Can you see my screen? Oh, now you can. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So this is the project that Dr. Rabab was just referring to, Break the Silence Mural Project, and this was took place in 1989. A group of 4 Jewish American women artists. We were invited to Palestine, occupied Palestine, and we lived for 3 months in a refugee camp in Ramallah, Kadura camp. And we learned so much. It really was a life-changing experience. We learned, we talked to hundreds of people, and all the stories became part of the murals. This is the Sabr cactus. It's how you can tell where Palestinian villages once were inside 48, because the cactuses have grown back like ghosts haunting the land. These are the people who hosted us, Mama and Baba. They've passed now, but they told us about how they lived through 4 occupations, but the Israeli one was the only one that took from them, took their land. And we met so many people, like I mentioned. This is a family whose home was to be demolished. And this is, I'll tell you that story in a minute. This is Adnan Zubaydi, an artist. He told us about being imprisoned for painting the Palestinian flower. And so he said after he got out of administrative detention, he painted thousands of flowers. These are images from the mural that was inside the Popular Art Center. And at that time, everything that we were doing was illegal. Palestinian culture was illegal, not like it's not now, but it was different at that time under the military occupation. There were soldiers everywhere around Ramallah. And so in this mural, we kind of embedded images of martyrs that otherwise we would not have been able to show. Also, Palestinians were not allowed to gather in groups larger than 3. So in so many ways, the project, this art project, was a project of much resistance and resilience. This is the house that I showed you earlier. All their possessions are outside because the house was to be demolished. The family was forced to live in a tent. And in the house I saw, before it was demolished, I saw this poster of horses that became part of the mural in the Popular Art Center. So all the stories became part of what we were, all the images became part of the murals. Now I'm going to talk to you about the project that Manar spoke of, which is Eyewitness Silwan. And this is Manar on a ladder in Batn al-Hawa. And the way we are resisting is by telling our stories. And this is a statement by Jawad Siem, who's the director of the Mada Creative Center. In 2015, this mural was painted in Wadi Hilwe. It's a quote from a Mahmoud Darwish poem, "My homeland is not a suitcase and I am no traveler." And this is Handala. As you all probably know, Najal Ali, the artist who created Handala, was assassinated in London in 1986. But here is another part of the mural. This says, "My home is not a suitcase and I'm not a traveler," in Arabic, with the national bird of Palestine. And last year, the mural was painted over. And this, after surviving for many years, and it was painted over by settlers who were supported by the Israeli army because they found it offensive. And the person who painted that mural was Eric Norberg, who is right now in this moment fighting to keep his job in Berkeley. He's on administrative detention from the Berkeley Unified School District because of his teachings of ethnic studies. He's an art teacher, and also his position on Palestine. So in Silwan, I'm going to go through these kind of fast because I really want to show you all of them. if I can. These are just ways that we've been working with the kids to really transform the neighborhood. And this is a shot of the hillside. This is a detail of the mural, and you can see in here all the eyes and the Palestinian flowers that have been painted over the last 4 years. And there's others. This is just what's visible from one angle. Some of the murals that really have transformed the streets very much. And in Batn el-Hawa, settlers are living right next door to Palestinians, Jewish settlers. So the street is filled with army and border patrol all the time. It's very, very violent, and it's a kind of a scary place. It's a very scary place. And so, but now the settlers, the Jewish settlers, when they walk down the street, they're confronted with these images. This refers to Alex Nieto, who was an American citizen, as it says here, who was killed by police officers in San Francisco. He was killed by gentrification. And as Rebecca Solnit writes, he died because a series of white men saw him as a menacing intruder in the place he had spent his whole life. So we're really, as Minar mentioned, trying to make these connections really visible. And here are, in this image, you can see the eyes of Shireen Abu Akleh, the journalist who was killed in Jenin, and the eyes of Malcolm X by Emory Douglas, the minister of the Black Panther Party. Above Malcolm X's eyes, that was 5 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna go super fast. We made some of these images into posters to protest the genocide in Gaza. The eyes of Hassan Kanafani, who was a Palestinian intellectual, novelist, playwright, and activist who was killed by the Mossad in Lebanon in 1972. This is the eyes of Milad Ayash, who was a young man, 15 years old. He was killed by settlers in Batn el-Hawa. This set of eyes was given to us to use by Sliman Mansour, who's a very venerated Palestinian artist. This is one of the youngsters who helped to put up the eyes. This is Doreen. We also honored martyrs from all over, so we're making connections with people such as Rachel Corey, who was killed in Gaza, in Rafah, in 2003. And so her eyes also stare out over the hillsides and are visible from Israeli tourist sites. So the murals that are seen across the city are seen by many people, and people get curious and they want to know who's doing this, because otherwise the Israeli tourist industry does not, of course, mention or recognize the Palestinian indigenous population that is living there and whose land they are taking for the heritage tourist sites and for religious tourism and for colonization. We were very honored to work with Ayman al-Hosri, who lives in Gaza, and he's been displaced several times now in the recent period. And before October, his work really centered on painting these incredible pieces on rubble. And this is the image that we worked on together with him for to be installed in the hills of Batn el-Hawa, in the hills of Silwan. So what we do often with people who live far away or can't travel for whatever reason is we take the work and we print it, and then we blow it up and glue it to the walls. And he said, I truly cherish that it is there, that the mural is there, and I hope I can go there and do more murals and participate with the people there, because we are all one. We are all one body, and we are all subjected to the same violence and torture. And this is what the piece looks like from a distance. And now Ayman is painting on the tents that he and his family and his community are living in, that they've been displaced to. This slide, there's much to say about it, but I'm also a clinical psychologist, and I'm really interested in the psychodynamics of racism and colonialism. And I put in the eyes of Sigmund Freud in the hills of of in the hillsides, and now the settlers are confronted with Freud's eyes, who whose great contribution was the consideration of the unconscious in our behaviors and what we're doing, and therefore in what they're doing, and is a kind of invitation for them to think about themselves. And as Edward Said said in his last work, Freud and the Non-European, the complex layers of the past have been eliminated by Israel. In other words, all of these projects that Israel is conducting ignores and destroys any other history except a Jewish one. So their plan has been from the beginning to use architecture and archaeology to somehow show that the only people that deserve or should be in Jerusalem are Jews. And this is, I think, really what the most important thing about the project is the way that we have been able to work with the youth. And as you can see in this image, that's what I have. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Green. We have so much more to discuss with you, and we will after. I just wanted to mention that I said we added one more class, and on July 8th we are going to have a class on Ghassan Kanafani. There is a new collection of his work coming out, so we will be having a new class on July 8th, which is a Monday, same time. We will be announcing it. I also wanted to say maybe when we come to the discussion, maybe we can also elaborate on the mural that you co-painted at San Francisco State, and the ways, again, that some people found Hamdallah offensive, and we had to remove Hamdallah and put a cactus in its place and discuss that. And the whole question of Fanon, and who was also a psychiatrist. And the last class is going to be on Fanon. And now we will move to Lexi, right? Am I saying your name right?
Lux,
Okay.
yeah, Lux. Yeah, Luxy, also my friends call me.
Palestine Action, who are doing incredible work. Thank you so much for joining us from London, who are actually like turning slogans into action and challenging military weapons going to Israel, and also have written about the connection between Grenfell and Palestine. And so we would like you to respond to the whole question about greed, gentrification, erasure, and settler colonialism. So please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And just like to say it's an honor to be shoulder to shoulder with you all. And thank you for inviting us to do this. So for those who don't know, Palestine Action is a direct action movement that started in the UK. It's now gone international. But for us, it really leveraged our position from inside the imperial core to expose and dismantle Britain's historic and contemporary complicity in the Zionist project. And the government here, as you can imagine, does all it can to stop us through arrests, imprisonment, extreme bail conditions, including no access to internet, house raids. And though the press like to write about us, often as thugs and criminals, they don't like to invite us to speak for ourselves, because we do challenge the history that is written and taught by the British. And we bring to light what the British political class continually deny still, and demonstrate that in the transnational resistance of the present context. So I just want to tell you a bit about our primary target, which is Elbit Systems. And Elbit Systems is Israel's largest weapons company. They produce 85% of the IOF's killer drones and military apparatus. They produce munitions and components for all of Israel's attack aircrafts. Now, the CEO recently boasted about how the company is crucial to the ongoing genocide, and they've been thanked by the Israeli military for their services as being like the main operating system behind the violent operations that are happening. And I think really importantly as well is the fact that the workers there have spoken about how they feel like civil soldiers. This is their contribution to the forces that are fighting the front line. They see themselves as an extension of the IOF. Right, and often what you see is the workers in Elbit have served in the IOF or do both at the same time. They also boast how quick the turnover is, so how the supply and demand, how quickly they'll supply at the speed of which the IOF are using up their munitions. And I think that's really important to keep in mind when we talk about disrupting that supply chain and disrupting the war machine and its greed and the amount of money that they're trying to make off this genocide. Also, the other thing to note is that they market their munitions, they market their products as battle tested on Palestinians. And so, you know, there's a twisted dimension to the footage that's coming out of Gaza, in which is also being used as a marketing campaign for when they then sell those products on to the regimes across the world as well. Now, so we know about British complicity. We don't have to go over the Balfour Declaration or the British mandate invested in Zionist industrial economy and ousting Palestinians from jobs in the 30s, or arming and training the Zionist soldiers for the Nakba. But the current context today, in terms of British complicity, it's very important, I think, for and has shown to be important for British citizens to understand that these arms factories, these Israeli arms factories, exist right on people's doorsteps. Right, in Leicester, these are regional cities and towns, Leicester, Shenstone, Kent, previously in Oldham and in Tamworth as well, but we shut those down permanently, and we will shut down the rest too. But they exist on people's doorsteps, and yet people are entirely unaware, right? So we've sustained these relentless campaigns against, for example, in Bristol, there is an Elbit HQ on Aztec West Business Park. You know, we've taken action against that, including breaking in, occupying the space, damaging hundreds of billions of pounds worth of their equipment that is used to produce and manufacture these munitions. We've caused structural damage so that the workplace is out of commission as well. And what has happened is that these actions that we've done, as well as having a lot of material effect on the company losing contracts. For example, they lost a £280 million contract with the Ministry of Defence because they kept having to report breach of security because we kept entering the factory, right? So when they have a contract with the Ministry of Defence, they then have to report a breach of security every time. So it becomes it's reputational damage. They're not a trustworthy business anymore to work with. So we're economically isolating them in this way. But as I was saying, these actions brought to attention of the local people who live there and always have, that there is this Zionist production house of the war machine. The Zionist war machine is on your doorstep, right? And so now these local people not only supply actionists with food and support and block police vans when they arrive, but they've also taken on these campaigns to demand the eviction of Elbit themselves, right? So like recently at Somerset Council meeting, because Somerset Council actually own the building that Elbit is renting for their HQ, locals went and the quote from one of them that they said to the councillor is, "You've made the people of Somerset participants in the war crimes taking place against the Palestinian people, and we will not allow this to happen in our name." Right? So as Palestine Action, we find our duty is in refusing that ongoing participation in war crimes that we citizens did not consent to. That's about my 5 minutes. I really want to talk about the action that we took against Arconic, which is the company who are largely, not even largely, substantially to blame, as a fire expert witness said, for the Grenfell fire. And so hopefully I get to talk about that when we have our conversation. But that's a bit of a contextualization to the campaign that we do and how we tackle greed of the war machine from its imperial core.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for actually like really sticking to the time and for covering so much material. So what I would like to do is I would like to maybe have go around now, maybe in like 3 to 4 minutes each, comment on each other's. I mean, I raised a lot of points with all of you, and actually, Lexi, for you, one of the questions I was asking, and a lot of people raised it, the whole question of direct action. Questions of direct action as a tactic versus other actions that people say. And of course, the recent campaigns and the recent mobilization and so on, and the people basically going and banking within the Congress and in the Grand Central Station and the bridges and getting arrested and so on. Actually, that has pushed the envelope farther and made some of the actions you've done are no longer sort of out of the norm. It made it much more within that, but maybe that was one of the things that, and you could talk about that. But I was just wondering if we can actually, like, maybe you have questions to each other, maybe you have comments to each other, and this time we can actually start in different direction. Did Manar leave because it's very late? Susan, is that what it is? Do you think that
she was unwell?
Oh, okay. All right. So why don't we? Okay, why don't we like start at this point with Robin? Did you need to leave, or are you sticking around?
No, I'm sticking around, but don't start with me.
Okay. All right. Okay. So that all right. Okay. So who would like to start? Anybody? It's up to you. Just like just maybe 3 minutes, and then do you want to start, Lexi, because you didn't finish
Well,
what you wanted to say?
I was going to say, actually, let me just respond to what you said, I think, as well.
Okay.
I can do that, and maybe we can move from there. So, for us, that direct action is based on changing the power dynamics, and understanding the kind of collective power of reorganizing those authoritarian dynamics in some way. So there are 5 principles to direct action as we see it, and so there's reasons. Let me just like very briefly go through them, actually, in 3 minutes, hopefully. Principle number 1 is disruption. Right, so any successful campaign has to disrupt the target, right? Because that's the only thing that counts. So stopping them being able to operate at cost, or at profit, scuppers their ability to operate at all. Right, especially when you think about this quick turnaround. They advertise they have such a quick turnaround in the weapons export. So if you jump in and you go and destroy the machinery that's manufacturing the products, then next week there's going to be a significant decrease in what is exported from the UK to the Zionist entity. Principle number 2 is sustained. Right, so disruption, it has to be sustained in order for it to be impactful. Right? And that relies on collectivity and formation and the ability to escalate, right? So you don't want to give them chance to recover, right? So, for example, the Tamworth factory, which recently closed down permanently after they reached a loss of 75% of their profits, right? Because we kept going and we kept going back. And so then when they'd been out of commission for weeks, they set up this whole like new security. It was like Fort Knox style security. Khalas, we went in still, we found our ways, we entered still. And so they've spent all this money on security. They're losing all of this money on structural damage, reputational damage, and then the running costs of the building and what have you, repairs. And you don't give them a chance to recover. Right? It also makes it unpredictable for the enemy. It makes them unreliable as a business partner, as I said. There's delays in deliveries and so on. Right? The third principle is focus. So for us, no, we don't target like train stations or McDonald's. Right? And it's good. There's more direct action happening now, which yeah, I was asked by Sky News at some point last year, what would you say to people who consider Palestine Action to be a violent organization? I said, put a victim in the box in court for me. Put a victim in the dock. The only one you can put is a bank statement. This is the only one that you can put, right? So there is no other victim but the bank statement, right? So for us, in order to win this, we need to focus our campaign. So ours is on 1 or 2 primary targets, and then their secondary targets as well. We apply pressure on that primary target in order to reach the outcome that we're already seeing happen. It is successful. It is happening. They are losing incredible amounts of money. We've shut down 3 sites in 3 years of Zionist military production in the UK, right? So the 4th principle is sacrifice. Whether you sacrifice a night in the police cell or like convenience or imprisonment, right? Every struggle requires struggle, right? So the powers that be aren't going to give in easily. But what we've actually noticed about sacrifice, and we don't at all compare ours to those of the Palestinian people. In fact, we draw on the samud of the Palestinian people in order for us to keep going, despite the increased police presence around us. But yes, there's this really effective tool with sacrifice where it scares them. It really scares them because they're aware that people are willing to risk their liberty in order to shut them down. And so you regain control by that, by showing them that you're willing to confront them and they can do the worst that they feasibly can to you, and you'll keep going. This is very frightening for them. They have no leverage anymore. Right? The final principle for us is dilemma. So creating the dilemma for the company, you know, the only way that we can win is if we make the harm we cause to our enemy greater than the benefit of them remaining open. Do they stay open and avoid the political loss? Or do they sell on and shut up shop in order to save themselves from making business losses? Because at the end of the day, they're a business. And if they're a business, it means that we know their weak point. Their weak point is that they need to make profit. That we can sabotage.
Thank you. Susan, do you want to address comments or to your colleagues as well? I asked you some questions. If you'd like to address them, you know.
Questions. I actually was gonna. I just want to say how honored I am to be with everyone, and what everyone had to offer today is just phenomenal. And I've been following Palestine Action, so it's a pleasure, in particular, to meet you. Rabab, I was going to show the mural at SF State. Would that be useful?
Yes, and also, okay, yeah, and then we can talk a little bit about Eyewitness Silwan. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see if I can do this. Yeah. So this is the mural at San Francisco State, which was spearheaded by the GUPS students. And this is the mural as it wound up. And wait a second. Okay. And that's the team.
You know, nothing is showing up on the screen.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I was trying. It's still not?
No.
Oh, well. That's
Maybe you can speak while Laith trying to figure out how to show it.
Okay.
Because we actually have the image of the now it's showing. Okay. Now,
yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, this is very strange.
But it's shaky.
Can you see that?
Yeah. Yeah, this is the final one, yeah.
Okay, and can you see this?
Yes.
That's the team, that's the GUPS team that I was honored to be a part of. And here is me and Faik Awais, Dr. Faik Awais, in the mural in process. This was the original design that we were not allowed to paint. And maybe you would like to speak to this, Rabab.
Well, I came in and I think that my hire had to do with the mural, because there was this tension between, and GUPS is a general union of Palestine students, so there was standstill between the students and the community that was supporting them. And of course, the muralist, you and Dr. Awais were part of it. And there was a standstill because Hamdallah, the figure, the little cartoon, which was created by Najil Ali, had the pen in one hand, which is Ghassan Kanafani's famous word, الكلمة البندقية, my gun is my pen. And in the other hand, he's holding a key, and on top of it, it's written Al-Auda, the return. And so the Zionist organizations had a serious problem with it and said this is very dangerous. because if Palestinians return to the homes of their ancestors, Israel would cease to have a Jewish demographic majority, and that threatens the security and the very nature of the Jewish state and Zionism and so on, and it had to go. And so the university president put a moratorium on the mural, which was never happened before. And by the way, also the indigenous mural was silenced as a result. And so there was complete closure. And so we met. When I came, we met with everybody and we were trying to figure out what to do. And then we decided basically we will remove Handala in order for us to have a mural, but Handala remained in the memory. So actually now Handala has more memory in it, and we were thinking that we will repaint it again. And in place of it, Susan and Fag decided, along with the students, to paint cactus that represents all the 532 villages that were destroyed by Israel in Nakba. And the only place that remains of them is the cactus, which you also mentioned in Eyewitness, Silwan. So that's, and it's very interesting because you mentioned that the Zionists found certain images offensive, and so they went and painted over it, like Mahmoud Darwish, Watani Laysa Haqiba, which is like it's a very interesting, like very simple poem, that my homeland is not a suitcase and I'm not a traveler. I'm the lover and the homeland is my beloved. I mean, it's very, very simple. It's not really, it's about exile and diaspora and so on. It's one of the least sort of violent poetry and so on. It's just very sad, and so for them to actually be offended by that, it just shows how deep settler colonialism is very troubled by any expressions of like connections or even or even kind of like lamenting being displaced. And yeah, so that's why I was kind of like thinking about that. But yeah, that's that what happened with the Saeed mural. But I also wanted to ask, I mean, the whole question about you painting all these eyes and you seeing, for me, it's like this beauty coming out of the pain and being able to resist by putting all these images. That's also commemorating and making people remember, because then they see it's like, whose image is that? But it's not only the images from Palestine, because the Malcolm X is in it. I know there is an image of Che because you gave us the mural, so we're looking at it. And so every time somebody looks at it and looks at all the images, people learn and they say, who's this? Who's this? Who's this? And they learn about the struggle of other people. So it also connects Palestine with the struggle and de-exceptionalizes Palestine and makes Palestine as part of the indivisibility of justice. So I think, and for the Palestinian muralists and for the community itself to be subjected to such violence every single day and be willing to do this, I mean, I think it's very hard to imagine how people get up every single day and do it. It takes a lot of resilience to be able to do that. So, and for people who are in solidarity with everybody who's here is actually doing this. So I thought that this is something to discuss and to emphasize and to think about that, because everybody discussed it. So I'm gonna stop there and just like maybe, I don't know if folks want to like comment on that, and the floor is yours. And we don't have comments, we just have everybody saying how beautiful everyone is and how wonderful. So please, the floor is yours.
Well, I'd love to hear what you all think. I mean, I'm in the middle of it. The project is going on. The next set of eyes hopefully will be from the Christian community, because we want to draw that parallel as well. What's happening for Christian Palestinians everywhere, and in particular in Jerusalem, and how they are being colonized and attacked too. So we want to, that's a new set of eyes, also Fanon. And we want to have a set of eyes of a Native American, an Indigenous American. But just to your point about the resilience of people there, I mean, you brought tears to my eyes. I mean, I mean, this is something that I've learned. My first time in Palestine, as mentioned earlier, was in 1989. And one time, or somewhere a couple years after that, I was in Gaza, and there's always been attacks on Gaza. This is, of course, much more extreme what's happening now. But I was there in a park, and all these artists were painting murals on the walls, and there's bombs dropping, not right there, a little bit in the distance, gunshots, and people were having a fight over art and the colors, and there's impassioned screaming about art and the colors, and it was just it was so surreal and so like the people's ability to keep on with life. You know, we teach life and they teach life, and there's so much love there. I mean, I don't understand really how people continue, really. And I've been involved in for it's 35, 40 years now. I don't understand, but I think I've come to the conclusion that it has to do with love. And like Che said, and that's why Che is there. It's about, the ability to love is how revolutionaries are able to continue on, and that's all I have to say.
Anybody? I mean, there's the different kinds of resistance that we're seeing and we're hearing about. So everybody said different things. I'm not pushing anybody to say anything. I see Robin now. Do you want to speak now? Go ahead. Please.
Yeah, I'll say something. By the way, that was really beautiful. And what everyone said was incredible. I figured the best way I could intervene on this is talk about what's happening right now on my campus in the UC in terms of direct action. And I wanted to apologize. I mean, our emergency meeting was about what had happened to our students in our department, who one got shot in the chest point blank with a rubber bullet by the University of California Police Department. And I ended up spending the night with the student at the emergency room, had major damage to heart and lungs. We had other students who had been arrested, dragged out, beaten by police. And all this is on video, and for no reason. They were kettled by the cops. They had abided by all the orders. We had a student who was snatched out of a crowd because she had a megaphone and was chanting, and pulled out and beaten right in front of everyone. And so the response of the university, our new leader, who's basically a campus security person who's taken over for the chancellor, was to blame the students, to blame the faculty who were involved in the struggle, to basically justify more police. It was like a bunch of different lies. Now, what does this have to do with our direct action? Well, as you know, University of California, as a result of the violence that our students experienced, waged a strike. UAW, Graduate Workers 4811, waged what was essentially the first, as far as I know, the first strike in US history for Palestine. And they went out, the federal government supported basically our head of the whole UC system, who ended up finding a judge who was sympathetic to the University of California, not to the students, and got a temporary restraining order. So right now, our meeting was about what are we going to do as a department? What kind of action? Part of that strike was withholding grades, making a decision that we're going to withhold grades and not take up struck work because the graduate students are strike. The injunction forced them back to work, and we still don't want to take up struck work. So right now there's a real crossroads. And I think, from the vantage point of a university that has always had police power, has always had that kind of regimentation, but never to this degree. People are forced to now make a decision about how far they'll go. And we constantly have to remind people that in Gaza, there are many academics under the rubble who don't have the choice of deciding how far they'll go. You know, so in many ways, this is a real turning point for us, for the University of California, for the nation. And it's like Bob said, people have been pushed to a limit they didn't expect. And I do hope that that our faculty can follow suit with the students and take direct action in more profound and more militant ways, because that's the only way things will change. And one last thing I should say is that part of the attack on our students justifying police response was direct action. This is what they call violence. They called violence using red food coloring to turn the fountain red. That is an act of vandalism and violence, and for that reason, they need to get the behinds kicked by the police, shot at, beaten with batons, dragged, and held, for 2 hours plus, and then, zip tied, and then have charges against them. You know, the young person who got pulled out, who had the megaphone, was charged with assaulting a police officer. You know, and this is the kind of thing they're going to try to get away with. So I think it's really, really serious that we stand up for these things, but also not forget the center Palestine in all this, which is why the students are still out here, still doing their thing. This is commencement week, I should say. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, and if I may, I think that the whole question about the way the narrative, I mean, there is definitely now that there is always contesting narratives, always. And there is always erasure. I mean, definitely there is a big battle to erase the narratives around what is Palestine, what's going on with Palestine, which I'm very convinced that this is why my class on Palestine was canceled. There is no other reason. They cannot justify it. There is no low enrollment. They make a lot of money out of it. The class fulfills. There is a lot of student demand. So there is no reason why they would do it, especially in summer school. But there is also another questions around narratives about what's happening with the encampments, what's happening with students' activism. So there is the whole question about quote unquote outside agitators, which is very similar trope to even when national liberation movements historically, for example, for Palestine always was seen as it's a Soviet front. You know, like Palestinians can't fight for themselves. They have to have somebody else come and tell them. But it's also about the students. The students are always considered as infantilized. They don't actually think for themselves. Somebody has to come and tell them what to do. But then the students and their supporters get to the point of a defensive mode saying, oh, it's only the students. But that has never been the struggle. It always has been students, faculty, community, everybody coming together, because the struggle is always collective and it's never within the borders of the campus. So in defending that, so there is all these issues that are coming together, and then you have all the right-wingers and all the so-called liberals who are saying, oh, what the hell happened to education? What's going on? And you see op-eds and writings every single day in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and they are lamenting what the hell happened to the education that we have. But the implication is that we need to restore Eurocentric, classical education, and there are certain things that don't belong in the classroom, that we really need to educate the students of whatever we are supposed to teaching them. And so like I had a student complain about another class I'm teaching. Why is it that I'm talking about this class there? I always tell students about everything. And I ask students to advertise everything. So that I get an email from the dean saying, you have your academic freedom as long as it is within the parameters of the university. I'm like, what are the parameters of the university? Like, what I would like to understand, what are they? And this is something that the implication is that there are certain things that you're allowed to do, there are certain things you're not allowed to do, and that affects our academic freedom. So there is all these discourses that are coming out that are basically trying to curtail the possibilities to think. And remember, Robin, we had that discussion about fascism. So I don't know what everybody else, Muhammad, you haven't had Dr. Abdo, you haven't had the chance to say something, and I see Lexi, your head nodding, so you may want to say something. Go ahead, Dr. Abdo, if you would like to. Or
يعطيك العافية, thank you. I think a few things. ويعطيكم العافية, thank you all so much again. The discussion of art. Art is about creation. Love is about creation. Both are about spirituality. And I'm reminded by Kwame Ture, who said that when you see people calling themselves revolutionary, always talking about destroying, 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 but never talking about building or creating, they're not really revolutionary. They don't understand the first thing about revolution. It's about creating. The Panthers taught us to create. The breakfast programs, the educational programs, arming themselves as a mode of self-defense, and that self-defense can manifest in many different ways and forms, again, right? Restraint or actual arms or direct action, because ultimately violence is a tactic, it's not a strategy. But it also speaks, and I'm thinking here out loud, how universities are a site of resistance, not liberation, and hence the difference between resistance and liberation. To me, there's a difference between the axis of resistance, which, of course, I support the right to resistance, but ultimately, there are problems insofar as that axis, insofar as the liberatory horizons that it offers. The queerphobia, the sexism, the hierarchies, the authoritarianism, and we need to be very honest and clear with regards to that. And that doesn't just exist within, and I'm going to name Hamas or Hezbollah, that exists on the left too. That exists, of course, amongst liberals too. The queerphobia, the xenophobia, and so on and so forth. The Islamophobia that exists on the left. The anti-spiritual dimension that exists on the left. So we're also not a coherent and unified front. And I think that's what really also distinguishes between mobilization and organization. What our youth had done in the encampments, they had transitioned from direct action on the streets to actually creating a new society. A new society in which the way that they contended with the land was different, the way that they eat, the way that they slept, the way that they breathed, manifested differently, the way that they celebrated life, the way that they mourned was differently. They engaged in a different kind of revolutionary becoming, what in Islam is referred to as the greater jihad against the fascisms of the micro-fascisms of the self, if you will, to evolve and to grow not just individually, but collectively, to bear that politics of responsibility. And what they were contending against is not Columbia University. It's not UCLA, I would argue. It's against the settler state, and that's what made them a threat. Because they actually created a pluriverse world. They showed how different people can live together and the role of spirituality within that and the role of ethics and politics within that and how fickle and feeble liberal identity politics are insofar as, yeah, I'm not going to just be an ally to you because you call yourself a Muslim or an Arab or because you're Black or indigenous, because you could be Arab and Zionist. You could be Black and Zionist. You could be Muslim and queerphobic. No, I'm going to base my contingent relationships and my allyship, my solidarity based on shared ethical, political, spiritual commitments. So it's not contingent on the identitarian politics of things, because that's how movements get co-opted. That's how we get Sean King and many figurations as Sean King, right? And so on, right? Well, you know, not only co-opting Black identity, but also Muslim identity and so on and so forth. But I fear because on the left and the so-called left, we don't have an ethics of disagreement. We don't have an ethics of creation. You know, people talk about dismantling this and that, dismantling capitalism. Why do we even need to dismantle anything if we know how to grow our own food? If we know how to live on the land? If we know how to live with one another? BIPOC people are disconnected from land. We don't know how to grow our own food to feed ourselves, let alone our families and communities. But who controls most of the land along the I-4 Rust Belt corridor and all stretches across the US? It's the white man who's armed to the teeth with stamp decrees and who feeds the metropolis. Most BIPOC people are heavily urbanized. So this question, what we need is to divest. What we need, in my humble opinion, is to create, and that's not to take away at all from direct action. But it's also the modality of creation. When I see Susan and talking about the creation of murals and symbolisms and stories, that's also a part of a narrative. The Zapatistas teach us that. They didn't emerge on the scene till 10 years after they had incepted and created. That's what made them dangerous. The Panthers, the same thing. It takes time, it takes labor, it takes energy. And in Islam, we're taught in the Quran, وَكَمْ مِنْ فِئَةٍ قَلِيلَةٍ غَلَبَتْ فِئَةٍ كَبِيرَةٍ, how much of a small group defeated a larger enemy because they were organized. The Quran says, وَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِنْ قُوَّةٍ, and prepare what it is that is necessary in strength in confronting your enemies. So to me, what is being created as an alternative? To convince, because I'm not just concerned with regards to the youth, and of course, Palestine, we talked about how it's interconnected with Black self-determination and indigenous sovereignty, and so on and so forth, and symbolisms of Che and Malcolm. But Malcolm was dealing in the realm of political theology. We were dealing with certain themes, again, insofar as the need for political theological projects that haven't evolved insofar as Islam. What would what would his Islam embody of a queer Islam, given his friendships with a queer Black man, a beautiful man by the name of James Baldwin? This is part of the discourse, the story, the narrative, the propaganda that manifests in art, that manifests in literature, that manifests in murals, that manifests in documentaries, that manifests in zines. But we're still missing that creation of alternative worlds, worlds that include all of our worlds and worlds of the below, not that hearken for the worlds of the above. So where is the thinking beyond the academy to create different forms of schools, different forms of maintaining our own sense of health, abolitionist modes where we don't need to call the police, different forms of transformative justice, and not just restorative justice that relies on the reform of the state, but actual transformations of justice. But that requires also BIPOC people going back to our own traditions, our own societies, our own cultures, not the fetish. There is no going back to 1492 or the time of Muhammad or Jesus or Moses. But how do we extract the ethical, political, spiritual commitments and project them into the present to create a different way of life with our kin? To me, these are the questions that occupy, my mind and my concern, because I'm also thinking again about the trans mother, in Harlem that has 2 jobs to feed her 2 kids. She gets there are genocides ongoing in the world. She gets her own plights. But how do we cater to our people? Our people that are out of the equation are having to play in the modality of survival. Our people that deserve to think about thriving and not just surviving, to think about liberation and not just resistance. And that requires projects on the ground for us to be able to convince our own people, here's a different way of life. This is why Tahrir failed, because it couldn't embody that alternative in a sustained way. Revolution is about practical questions. What are you going to do when somebody gets sick? What are you going to do when somebody gets hungry? What are you going to do with a nuclear power plant, with the army, and so on and so forth? And unless there's a political project that has already taken root, unless there are people that are willing to transform of our way of life, we're doomed to return back eventually to the status quo. I recall, sorry for taking so much space, but during the pandemic, this isn't normal and we're not going back to normal, and somehow we went back to normal. So, and the contradictions of it all, we're sitting down, engaging in some modes of resistance, of circulating images. And of course, that's a must with regards to Palestine, our beloved Palestine, on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, and so on, with phones mined from another genocide of copper and cobalt in the Congo. The blatant contradictions, not just paradoxes. How do we create then alternatives? That becomes the figuration that has really been occupying my mind for 20 years, of what we learned from the legacies of the Panthers, from the Zapatistas, and that I wish we'd really further build on, particularly as youth, as elders, and so on. So, yeah.
Are you muted, Rabab?
Only 1 minute left. And I want to give Lexi and Susan, but I just want to raise 3 points, not for now. We can discuss them in the future. One is the fact that there are structures that are bigger than us. So it's great, fun and dandy to say whatever we want to do, but we don't operate in a vacuum. Secondly, definitely there are theories of liberation and theories of resistance and theories of whatever vision is there, and some of them are actually being created. So it's not that they are not being created, and not only Zapatistas and so on everywhere. And third, I think this is all of them, because I just don't want people to understand who are in the class and listening to us here that this is not happening, that this is not.
No.
Now, I know what you are saying is actually you are like saying that we really need more and more and more. You're critiquing some of the stuff that has happened that actually requires more. You are not saying that it doesn't exist. So I just want people to understand that you are saying that we actually really need to be much more self-critical, much more understanding of what we are doing in order for us to do things better, because we deserve better. Our people deserve better. Our movements deserve better. Okay, I'm going to give Lexi and Susan, and then we'll wrap up. Go ahead, Lexi.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Oh, yeah, cool. So just in terms of that as well, and kind of creating these cultures, one thing I've been thinking a lot about recently, and that we see time and time again, of course, is that the coalitions that we create because of the coalitions that are created in their oppressive forms, right? And so we become united when, okay, so I wanted to just bring it back to Grenfell as well, and just mention the action that was taken against Grenfell, just in memory of the anniversary as well, to talk about that again. So there was an action that was taken against Arconic, who created the cladding for the Grenfell Towers. Grenfell Towers was a great massacre where at least 72 people burned alive when the building went up in flames. And it was another example of how property is more valuable than lives of Black and brown people, same as we see in Palestine. And the activists who did that occupied the rooftop for 2 days, and the local community came out to like pass water where possible, and the fire services refused to obey the police and bring him down. Right. And so you have this moment of like coalition between the police, not the police force, between the fire services who went through what they went through at Grenfell. Right. You have the community who were there for Grenfell, who are coming and supplying like necessary food and water for this actionist who stays on the rooftop. And you start seeing this coalition of groups who wouldn't otherwise be working together because there was a common enemy. And Arconic don't just make the cladding, they also make the components and the materials for the Apache helicopters and for the F-35 fighter jets. There you go. It's all coming together in one greedy monster, right? And so we're kind of like this pattern bubbling beneath their oppressive coalitions above and their forces above. And I just wanted to note that, and also just in response to what you were saying, Robin, as well, and also this idea, like, what are the parameters that you were saying, Dr. Abdul Hadi, this idea that in the judiciary system, when we enter it, we kind of tilt it. And instead of going on that defensive, oh, but we're good people. No, Khalas, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm a terrible person, but I am not as bad as the war criminals who we are targeting here. So we go on the offensive, right? And so use that judiciary space for Freedom of Information Acts to expose them further. I always say to activists who are joining, when an officer arrests you, you arrest them back, because they have to show up in court too. Right, and they have to stand there and talk about how they assessed your human rights. And so I would just like to note as well, on a high note, that Suhail, the 21-year-old who did take on Arconic, damaged £500,000 worth of materials there that were being used, then had the triumph in court and was not guilty. Why? Because the legal argument was necessity to save human lives.
Susan?
I feel like I really said everything I needed to say before. So I just want to say again how much I appreciate everyone here and the great minds that you embody. And I think the, making history visible, I think, and memory, I think being connected to ourselves and connected to our pasts and our presents and our imaginations, I think is where I find some kind of hope, but it's really hard in this moment.
Robin, close us off. Oh, thank you. You're done, right? Okay. Robin, close us off. Do you want to?
Oh, I look. I'm not following Mohammed.
Okay.
No, it's closed.
Okay.
Free Palestine, solidarity.
Thank you so much, all of you, and thank you for everybody who joined us online. Thank you for everybody who's taking the course. This has been another wonderful, amazing discussion that raises so many other questions, and we will be doing more of them. Thank you for taking all this time and bringing all these incredible ideas. Definitely free Palestine, a free international solidarity, memory for the people who were perished in Grenfell, and memory for everybody who have perished in Gaza and all around the world, for justice, for freedom, for us to live a better life. Take care until we win. Thank you. Alaikum salam.